Please all rise and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for all attending tonight's April 12th Board of Trustees meeting. Start the meeting with the Employee of the Month. I'll just tell you, this employee, I think ever since I was a trustee, I've always done grievance day on taxes. And this employee has always been so good, so conscientious, always appearing, listening to everybody's problems. And I'm sure that, although I don't answer the phone in there, I'm sure the phone rings often. So I'd just like to read what her co-workers wrote. And it says, and this is for Daniel Burns. She's a tax receiver, obviously. We are recognizing Daniel Burns today for her support in various projects that the village has been undertaking over the last year. It should be mentioned that Danielle is our village tax receiver, and as such, she manages the receipts of all village taxes due between June 1st and June 30th. Yes, this is a plug to remind all village residents to pay their taxes on time. She's always working, so that no one is subject to the delinquency fees beginning on July 1st. In this regard, Danielle maintains a very large database recording up-to-date information on all village properties and fields numerous inquiries. Last December, Danielle was instrumental in providing data and analytics that were leveraged for several village projects, one of which was to identify potential properties that could be considered for the Community Preservation Fund, and ultimately led to initial lists that was submitted to the CPF board last month. And I'll just tell you that was a very important project. In years past, most of the CPF funds that we'd gotten and the properties that were obtained were randomly selected. With Danielle's help and with Trustee Allen, we were able to picture the overall village and set priorities on what we wanted for CPF funds. And we also took a very close look at Dune Road, identified areas along there that are owned by other conservancy agencies, from Nature Conservancy to Beconic Land Trust. There's a couple of state pieces in there too, and identified properties that would be significant if we obtained on the bay side, even with houses on them, that would increase those areas and tie them together. So it was a big project, and I certainly thank her for that. To accomplish this, Danielle helped us identify the required data elements in the database and work with her tech vendor to extract the information and lay it out in a simple way so it could be reviewed and analyzed. She figured all this out on her own and also helped answer our questions on specific properties where needed. In addition, Danielle took the incentive to validate information referenced on the Southampton town site, referencing historical structures located in Southampton Village. A sincere thank you to Danielle. We can now leverage our information in a useful way and much more quickly when needed. Thank you, Danielle. I don't think you're here tonight, but if you've paid your taxes, this is who you've spoken to. Next week, we have public comment. It looks like a fair amount of people have signed up here. Please try to keep your comment to 3 minutes, and when you approach the podium, state your name and your address. Robert Smith?
Yes, sir. My name is Robert Smith, and I reside at 5 Adams Lane. For the past year, I have been participating in the effort to prevent the overbuilding of small or unique lots in the village. I applaud the work of the Planning Commission and of this board in acting on their recommendations in changing the code to limit the size and height of new homes and related accessory structures in the village. I urge you to approve the Commission's latest recommendations regarding GFA. As my letter that I have written to you indicates, I have also participated with my neighbors in several hearings before the ZBA and the ARB concerning the building plans for 58 Roscoe Drive. We are very fortunate to have the dedication of the men and women who serve voluntarily on those boards. Our objections and concerns were given a fair hearing, and I believe we have convinced the majority of each board that the building plans presented by the applicant before them were inappropriate and should not be approved. Nevertheless, we find ourselves back before the ZBA again 1 year later because the applicant withdrew his application before a final decision was rendered after the hearing was closed for a decision. Nothing has changed in that applicant still seeks a variance relief to put a pool in the middle of 2 front yards at the intersection of 3 village streets. I understand that this board cannot interject itself in the hearings of these independent boards, and I am not asking you to do so. I am asking that you, however, review the contractual agreement that you have with the village attorney to provide legal advice to the village boards and to make a determination of whether he can render such advice in an unbiased manner before the ZBA when he has issued a specific recommendation on behalf of his other client, the ARB, for the ZBA to approve the applicant's request to put a pool in a prohibited location under the village code. He should be asked if he considered, in issuing that recommendation, if he considered the consequences for the ZBA if it followed his advice in establishing a new precedent for granting front yard pool variances, which are very narrow and limited to backyards out of public view. If he didn't, that is why he has a conflicting interest in serving 2 clients on virtually the same matter and should not be representing the ZBA as a village council in that matter, and why this village should not be paying them to do so. The second matter I would like the board to consider is the authority of the ARB in approving building plans in non-historic areas of the village. The Southampton Association has retained counsel to review the code and court rulings and wrote a detailed letter with a legal analysis of the Ferrara case that was decided over 10 years ago. That letter was in August of 2015. The 58 Roscoe matter involves the ARB rejecting plans that comply with the village code, but in terms of GFA, setbacks, pyramid law, etc., but were not found to be compatible or harmonious with the surrounding properties, the properties in the Roscoe neighborhood or in the village in general. It is time to have the Planning Commission undertake a review of the ARB's authority in non-historic situations to ensure that it can continue to exercise its authority to stop inappropriate structures from being erected in the village, even if they are technically allowed under the village code. Had this authority not been compromised by the inappropriate interpretation of the Ferrara case by certain practitioners before that board, we may have been able to avoid the obvious blunders that have been erected in the village over the last 10 years, which we all must live with for the next 50. I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Maureen, you're on here, but we have a public hearing on, I think, the residency requirements. I don't know if you want to wait till then, or...
Can I do it now?
Absolutely.
Or is that out of order?
No, you can do it.
Because I don't know if I want to stay. My name is Maureen Dervin, 97 Breeze Lane, but I'm here speaking on behalf of my husband, Ronald Hill. Okay? As a resident of the Village of Southampton, I object to the addition of non-residents to village boards. It has been said that there aren't sufficient numbers of residents who wish to serve, but is that true? Does the village adequately advertise for board members, and do they keep a public list of those that have offered to serve? Are some residents that have applied or would be willing to serve been discriminated against because of preconceived notions as to their acceptability? There is a general blanket refusal to accept engineers, architects, builders, and real estate people because of a preconceived notion that they have a conflict of interest. None of these professions are excluded from being the mayor or serving as a trustee within the village. Why discriminate against them being on a board? Tonight, I am representing the Village of Garden City on a large residential development that is being considered. I am reviewing the traffic aspects of the project. In the Village of West Hampton Beach, I have served as the planning board's engineer for 10 years and review all of the site plans that come before the board. In both cases, I simply don't do any private work in either jurisdiction, nor do I do work for developers that come before those boards, so that there are no true conflicts of interest. I have also served the planning boards of the towns of Islip, Southampton, and Riverhead in the review of development matters. I have a friend that is a partner in a large multidisciplined engineering firm and serves as the chairman of the Village of Port Jefferson's planning board. Other towns and villages do not use blanket discriminatory standards to limit board membership. Potential conflicts of interest can be addressed on an individual case-by-case basis between the member and the board's attorney if an issue arises. To just assume that individuals of certain professions will show favoritism and have no integrity is offensive. I would like to add my own words to that. Several years ago, I saw an advertisement in the Southampton Press looking for board members, and I interviewed for a position. I later was told by the then mayor, several months later, he took me aside and said, I wanted you to know I wanted you to on the board, but you were not selected because your husband is involved in development, which I found extremely offensive. And if anyone knows my husband and I, they know I think for myself. So I'd hate to see that same way of thinking extended to some other spouse in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Judy?
I'm Judy Johnson, and I live at 239 Little Plains Road. And good evening, Mayor Irving and trustees. The last two speakers are a hard act to follow. But I have a few notes because Tuesday afternoon, April 10th, the Senior Committee and the Historical Museum entertained 30 patients at the Hampton Care Center with music, refreshments, beautiful flower arrangements, and crystal vases that had been imported from the museum. Tom Edmonds lugged all of that stuff down there. We even had to bring our own water to make the punch. But Sandra Luss and Tom, of course, himself, and Nicole and Lori and Georgette and myself, we feel that we gave them a very nice afternoon. And it was nice to see smiles on the faces of people that don't smile very often. We're planning another event up there in the fall. And the reason we're doing it there is because we just can't fit all these people into the Historical Museum. On May 1st, thanks to the efforts of Trustee Kimberly Allen, the seniors of the Village of Southampton will be honored at the Historical Museum with an afternoon that is informational and entertaining. And we will have wonderful refreshments. And if any of you aren't old enough to come, I'm inviting you anyway. Secondly, on a different note, I am thrilled to read that the beach access is now perhaps a dormant issue. I am thrilled to think that the people who have been going to Meadow Lane to celebrate living here are not going to be refused. And in addition to that, the zoning bill that you are going to be voting on very soon about the 10% reduction and so forth, I feel the committee has worked very diligently on that. It does not affect the small districts, and it seems to me that a change is really a very good idea to reduce the overbuilding here. In fact, a house on my street is a perfect example of that. In addition, I know that the village boards need members, and part of the reason is that a lot of people don't live here year-round. We have, on my street, I believe there are 7 year-round houses occupied. But I truly believe that the people who are on the boards making the decisions for this village should live here. And I agree with the Southampton Press editorial today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Rob?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm Rob Coburn. I live at 345 Hill Street. Good to see all of the trustees. I'm here to just ring the bell again on traffic safety issues. I know there's a lot of priorities. I know things are being discussed and worked on. In the meantime, while maybe a larger approach is being considered, I wanted to, and I should mention that Bill Hattrick in particular has been very helpful in encouraging Gary Gillespie and that team to pursue some stopgap measures and some individual items. But I wanted to suggest that for Hill Street and perhaps other areas in the village, that you would consider speaking with the Highway Department about repainting lines where there are bike paths to make sure that they are visible. I think New York state law allows a 6-inch wide stripe on any road stripe. We might want to consider that if it's allowed for those bike lanes. And to press for having the bicycle icons repainted and more of them added, so that there may be one within 50 feet or so of each major intersection. My research says that those sorts of visual inclusions into a driver's view are really key to getting them to slow down and to think generally about traffic laws. So I'd ask you if you might consider that and see if the Highway Department could do some of that.
Thank you. Is there anybody else from the public who'd like to make a statement? Yes.
Good evening. My name's Mitch Mayer. I'm a resident of 47 Leo's Lane, in part of the Roscoe subdivision. My family moved there about 24 years ago. I'm also a retired Southampton school teacher. What drew us here was, for probably all of us, was the charm of the area. And just to give you an example, which I'm sure you know, in the last 3 or 4 years, just on my street in Leo's Lane, there's been, I think, at least five houses built, the proverbial McMansions, that when I go to the building department, they list it at 4,400 plus square feet. But of course, that doesn't include the basements with the 10-foot ceilings. It doesn't include the attics, some of which have dormers. It doesn't include the pool house. And I want to speak in favor of the more limited building code, which you've spoke about. I'm interested in preserving what's left of the charm of the area, and I also think it helps to preserve the, I think it actually helps to preserve the value of the property by limiting the building code. Thank you for your help. Bye-bye.
Any other comments? Okay, moving ahead, we have a board presentation tonight, bike share program. Chris Diamond.
Great, thank you, Lisa.
Good evening, Mayor Irving, members of the board. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present here tonight. My name is Chris Diamond. I'm a lifelong resident of Southampton. I'm a 12-year member of the Southampton Fire Department as well as a lieutenant, and own multiple businesses throughout Southampton, including the Free Ride, which is operated in Southampton Village since 2012. We've expanded nationally to over 15 different cities, and my background in the Free Ride is marketing, microtransit operations, and management. This is my cousin and partner, Patrick O'Donohue. And we passed out a quick presentation. Hope not to take up too much of your time. Basically, what we're proposing to do is operate initially 20 bike share program throughout the village. Hope to be running up by Memorial Day weekend of this year at no cost to the village at all. First, I'd like to just start with a basic idea on what a bike share is. Bike sharing is an innovative transportation program ideal for short distance, point-to-point trips, providing users the ability to pick up a bicycle at any self-service bike station and return it to any other bike station located within the service area. What they'll do is they'll help improve first mile and last mile connections between other modes of transportation. They're a green alternative to other forms as well, and they're fun. The type of system that we're looking to operate is called a dockless system. It's app-based, and it's much less invasive to the village than, say, like a city bike style docked-based system. While dockless systems don't require a bike rack, we feel by adding a rack for pickup and return locations will keep the bikes neat and organized compared to other dockless type systems. Basically, with a dockless system, you can have a bike return to anywhere that we designate to be a return location or pickup location. Some of the locations that we were looking at to put a bike rack in would be Cooper's Beach, Agawam Park, the Southampton train station, and Gin Lane Beach, as well as a few other privately owned locations. And basically the rack, I'll show a picture in there, but we'll get to that. How it works, the user will download an app, they'll join our program. They will then be able to locate a bike and scan the bike that they intend to rent out. So the app will then unlock the bike. The user will be able to ride the bike to their desired location, and then once complete, they can bring the bike back to a designated area, lock the bike, and complete their ride. What we're requesting is that the village allow us to place our racks initially in those 4 locations we mentioned, with the possibility of adding later with board approval should demand increase, and we feel like there are other locations that people will be able to ride to. Now, we'll be able to see where people are riding bikes to and what areas show a lot of demand. So, there will be some adjustment with that as it goes on. We're trying to see, what makes sense and where people are actually riding the bikes. With the racks, we'd like to include signage. The signage will improve the visibility of the system itself, but it also provide usage instructions and educate users on the laws of riding a bike in the village, because I feel that is a big part of not only people riding bikes, but understanding what the laws are. With that, we will be able to actually have alerts that come up to the user while they're riding, saying that, these areas, specifically like Main Street, you can't ride your bike down Main Street. So we can actually geofence those areas and have alerts come up to alert them of certain, restrictions and things like that. Again, educating the riders, along with when they sign up, they will be provided with, a list of laws and rules in the rental agreement and signing up. So it'd be, as you join, you would have to agree to all of these specific things. These types of systems have been implemented in cities, hundreds of cities and universities across the U.S. Mainly, they've been subsidized by the cities themselves. But a lot of them, the dockless style systems is new within the last couple of years. So there's not a lot of cities that, larger cities that are really getting into this. There's a few that are just starting now to go in some of the larger cities now. New York City is looking at it. One of the biggest dockless type system would be Lime Bike. So Lime Bike operates in an area like Miami. The issue with their style system with a dockless is that they don't have in any area that's specifically designated to put the bikes. And that has been the biggest issue with dockless, which is why our system, we would like to include the racks, because I think, keeping it organized is a big issue, as well as providing visibility. So, in conclusion, we hope you can support to help make the village more accessible to people while still being eco-friendly, and be happy to answer any questions I'm sure you'll have. You have some.
Chris, I'll tell you, your free rides is a great hit.
Thank you.
There's a lot of people that really enjoy that and make good use of it. One of the issues that I've always been told on doing this shared bicycle is the issue of people leaving bikes at various places, just dropping off, locking them, walking away. Now, does your dock system here require it to go back to the original?
Yes, you'd have to, in these locations, you'd have to actually, in order to lock the bike and can stop it not be getting charged for usage, you'd have to be within that geo-fenced area, which is where those racks would be. Okay. So it's not like I could take my bike and ride it to Village Hall and park it right here and walk away from it. You can do that, but you're going to continue to be charged, and we'll also be, we can GPS track the bikes. Mm-hmm. And then so there are instances where you can actually pause the ride, which would allow, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not still getting charged for it, but what it means is that if I want to go to, say, Sean's place, and I want to lock the bike, I can pause my ride, which allows me to lock that bike and not allow somebody else to come pick it up. So this bike still is linked to me. So the idea is to not have the bikes just strewn all around. That's why we feel with putting the racks in, it kind of gives that feel of a dockless, but without all the infrastructure, or a feel of a dock base without the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So.
Sure.
Do the bike stores rent bikes here?
I believe Rotations rents bikes, yeah. Yep.
But I think it's a little bit of a different thing because Rotations will do a long-term rental. Yours is...
Rotations has different, set time frames for which they'll rent. It's usually on a daily basis. It's a set daily rate within, unless you're using, unless it's, within a few hours. This you'll be able to rent. I could ride from the train station to the park, lock the bike, and I'm done. And then somebody else can pick it up from there and go to any one of those locations. Now, that's not to say that, if the feedback that we get is, maybe we need one over here, a rack somewhere else, then we have a lot of ability to make the docking stations really wherever we want. It's all at the back end of the app, allows us to geofence specific areas, and those can be drop-off and pick-up locations. So it's not like set once we start where it is. And like I said, the nice thing about it too is with that we can geofence different areas and have alerts come up, like I said, to, again, Main Street. You can't ride your bike on Main Street, but you can get an alert to tell you that.
So if I arrive at the train station and I go to the dock, does the dock take up a parking spot, or can you put that on a grassy spot?
It can go anywhere. It's basically, realistically, the dock is really just a bike rack. And the reason why we're using that is to keep it neat and organized, and we don't want the bikes just put within any, it's to give a visual that this is where the bike belongs. It's not necessarily a dock, it's basically just a bike rack, and that's to keep it organized.
And what's the time limit if I sign up for it? Is it how much time do I get on the bike?
You can rent the bike for, we're still kind of going through kind of pricing structures and how it would all work, but you could actually rent the bike. We're thinking a 3-day limit. So if you're going to rent the bike and you can do it on an hourly or a daily basis, if the bike doesn't return within a certain period of time, then they would either be charged with loss of bike, so they would be charged for the bike, or, we can find the bike and figure out what why it hasn't been returned. But typically, you'd have a set amount of time, which the user can pick, how much time they plan on riding.
A lot of times on bike sharing, everybody goes from one direction to another, like they'd want to go to the beach in the morning, and then all the bikes are at the beach. Will you make availability to get those bikes back?
Absolutely. That is one of the biggest costs. That is honestly, one of the biggest costs of bike shares is reallocating, right? So you have to, we'll have to take the initiative to make sure that there are bikes in areas where they should be. If all the bikes are at Cooper's, we know that we should then bring some and stack them around. Now, initially, we're talking about 20 bikes, 5 bikes per rack. So, and again, not every rack is going to be full. You have to leave empty racks, so if somebody wants to come in, they can still do that.
But how do you know if someone parks in their village parking lot and goes and gets one of your bikes and rides it to Cooper's? How do you not know that they're going to ride it back?
Well, that's where they would pause the ride, okay? So that's kind of where a risk comes in. The user can say, okay, I'm going to take it from the train station and I'm going to go to Cooper's. And I can pause my ride and I can stay at Cooper's, and in that time you're getting charged. Or you can stop your ride, complete your ride, go to the beach, but then there's no, somebody could at Cooper's say, I want to ride a bike. So they take a bike. So, that's where, it has to, there is some risk there for the rider. But if not, they can catch a free ride, so.
Good recovery.
And last question, are there any licensing or insurance issues that the village has to think about on that? I know they're city subsidized elsewhere, and I don't know how those arrangements are done.
Yeah, so typically city subsidized. It's usually kind of like they go out to bid, and they do require, there's no permitting. The insurance would all be on us. It'd all be liability as well as, just insurance on the bikes themselves. But the liability really doesn't lie on the village, because it's all, we're not asking you to be a part of the business. We're asking just for a location to put a bike. So it would be like a jitney stop. If somebody got on a jitney stop, the village isn't liable if something happens, but so we're not looking to put any liability on the village at all.
But with your staggered time frame, someone could take the bike to Cooper's, or someone could take the bike and go to the Shinnecock Inlet, or
They won't be limited to where they can ride the bike.
But it's time limitations, right?
They will be limited by time, but it's not a limit that we set. It's a limit that, if they take the bike, and it's going to be an hourly thing,
That's
right?
what I needed to know. Okay.
So it would be hourly, and if they can ride the bike 8 hours a day, they could start and say, I'm going to ride it all day and pay for a daily rate, or they can start, with an hourly rate, and, that's something that the user has to figure out on their own. But they can ride the bike wherever they want. And that part of that is we can get to then see where they're riding the bike. What are the most trafficked routes? Where and it kind of helps us figure out, where the people are riding and where they're going to. And so we can track all of that.
I would add bus stops to your locations, because we get a lot of bus riders that come in.
Yeah.
Especially up by the McDonald's station. There's a station there, and there's a station over by Town Hall, and interesting to see.
Yeah, and we don't want to start and add a whole bunch of,
Right.
We want to start small and figure out where do people need to go, and then we can always add more later. There's, the jitney, there's a lot of different places. But like I said, we're looking to start small. It's 20 bikes. But hopefully expand and then expand out even further. We've spoken with informally with the town about possibly doing something, in other municipalities. which they seem to be receptive to, but we haven't spoken to them formally.
And this is your company?
Yes.
Maybe Uber will buy you like they bought that company yesterday.
Well, that's possible, but you never. Any
Any other questions?
Yeah, so if somebody does hold it longer, they can adjust it by just going to the app and adding hours type of thing, right? Is that what
Yes,
you're
yep.
saying? So,
You'll have control over that, really, the user. And then, inevitably, there's going to be somebody that locked their bike, and they did, and that comes on a customer service end on our end, where, look, I was a minute over, and there's different things like that. And that's stuff that we would have to do on a case-by-case basis. But, we're looking for it to be successful, so it's working with everybody to make sure that it.
So the 4 locations you've chosen to start, or would like to start, are the 4 most heavily trafficked in the summer.
Yeah.
Coopers, Agawam, the train station for commuters, and weekenders coming, and Gin Lane Beach.
Yeah, we feel that those are
Beach Club.
probably, we were thinking towards the south end of Agawam there, towards this Bathing Corp. But we feel that those are the heavily trafficked areas. And like I said, it's a good starting point. You know that you're going to get people going to those locations. And again, a few privately owned places, so.
And as Trustee McGann asked about other competitors or other companies or stores that currently do rent out bicycles, are you in conversation with them, or just, are they aware or anything?
I haven't spoken to Rick, but
I don't think it's a direct conflict. It seems like they're different.
yeah, I think it's different, and I think it's a different clientele as well. I haven't spoken to him about it, but I don't really think that there is much impeding in a way. I think our model is totally different than what he does there.
So you ask your customers to sign a liability waiver. My concern might be, this is just something I just thought about for the moment, and I'm sure that you would be willing to indemnify the village against the possibility of, let's say, someone tripping over your bike rack?
Yeah, we can absolutely look into, make sure, we've been working with a former town attorney to make sure that, we're doing this the right way. So, anything
Because, that would have to be an absolute must in my mind.
Right, over the bike racks. Yeah, I think that could be added in. And then even, additional insured on the policy if needed be. But I don't know, again, I'm not a lawyer, but I don't know what I don't think there's any liability there. Again, from the tripping point, but again, that becomes on us because it's our property. It'd be our racks, our...
That's what I was saying, you would indemnify us because it's our property, your bike rack.
Right, yeah, well, that's what I mean, yes.
So,
And is this particular program currently anywhere else? You mentioned a company that's down in Miami.
It's not...
So this improves upon that model, which I like about it. But
Yeah, this actually is in a couple different cities, one being Syracuse, the company that we're working with. They've been running for, I believe, 2 or 3 years now, and it's slowly expanded. They run a seasonal kind of thing, and they do it on a bike trail thing that they have there. And they are in, I think, 3 or 4 other cities, Florida, they're in Georgia, and they're smaller based systems. Not a lot of larger cities do dockless style, but it is starting to become a new thing. So DC did a dockless, and the problem with theirs was the issue with people leaving their bikes. So that's kind of why we want to put the racks up, because we feel it'll allow us to keep it organized.
Interesting.
Can I just say one thing? I'm just trying to picture who would use this. You put a rack at the railroad station. Is that because somebody's going to get off a train in a suit and a suitcase and they're going to drive to Cooper's Beach on a bicycle? I mean, why would they do
Well,
that?
they could do that. They could come off the train and go to the spur, which is, a working environment. Then you get a lot of people that come from the train and actually come out and go to the beach. I mean, that not necessarily in a suit, but there are people that do that. There are people that do trips from, say, East Hampton or Hampton Bays and come out to Southampton and go into the village. They don't necessarily go to the beach. They're not necessarily looking to go far, but it's utilizing the, it's the last mile of public transportation, which is a huge deal in cities now, because, everybody has bus stops and things like that, but they're not always within areas that are, walking distance or people are willing to walk. So it's getting that last mile.
So that last scenario you just said, somebody coming from one town to the other, using the train to go, do a day trip into the village. So instead of them utilizing a cab or Uber or something, then this would be there.
Right, you could ride it to a doctor's appointment in South. I mean, there's many different scenarios in which people don't necessarily use it, the train just to come out from the city. I mean, it's public transport between municipalities.
Interesting.
Because the other thing is, okay, some bicycles end up down at Cooper's.
Mm-hmm.
And the person says, gee, is he going to drive down to Cooper's, park in Cooper's, and why would he do that? And I can't imagine there would be any demand. It'd be one thing if you had it in the middle of the village and they live close enough to the village, they walk and drive down. But I can't imagine there would be any demand for it.
You'd have bikes. Let's say there's people in the village that want to go to Cooper's. They could.
Then you're not going to walk to the railroad station so you can get a bike.
But they're not. It wouldn't be just at the railroad station. You'd have one at Agawam Park where you could walk in. There's different locations, and you can take the bike to any one of those locations. It's not that the rides would necessarily begin at Cooper's Beach, but you'd have people going there and needing to get back to where they originated. So.
I'll give you, Bill, that's a good question of who would use it, and I'll give you a personal example. When I was down in Washington, D.C. with my family, and where they weren't dockless systems, but where they have these littered about, is in the mall, because you have the Smithsonian, and we were at the Capitol, and we were heading down to the Washington Monument, and the line was past that. Kids pointed it out to us. I looked over and saw the thing, so we all got the bicycles. And that was just to really, instead of schlepping all the way there, we rode the bicycles. Saved a little bit of time and docked them there. And then we used them, and then picked up and came back, and it was a different system, put up a card or whatever, and then rode them back to where our car was. So there's a scenario where we just used it to go 2 miles and then come back, and that was it, and it was different. It was kind of.
I can see Agawam Park is at least in the center of the village.
But that's where they're going to the
free ride. Your thing that'll take all 10 of you down there at one time free is sitting there competing with your bicycle. So I'm trying to figure out why anybody would.
Well, some people enjoy the riding of the bike and the exercise. I think you see that a lot.
I forget how old I am.
Grab your cigar and then get on the bicycle.
But again, it's one of those things where we want to see what the demand is. Yeah. And so it's, again, we want to start start it here in the village, and then hopefully if the demand is high, then be able to ride the bike from Hampton Bays to Southampton or to Watermill or.
I mean, I think it's worth the shot to investigate, because that's when he came and presented. I was around with the free rides, and again, similar questions. Really, who's going to use this? And it's turned out to be an extremely popular item, and also, it's an electric car, so it's green, and so there's many other aspects to it. So this is just, to me, I see this as an extension of that, and see how it works. And see.
I'm laughing because when you first came and showed us about the free rides, I thought to myself, how are they ever going to make any money off of this? Because they're giving free rides. But then the advertising, and actually it has been a really terrific thing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're in about 15 different cities now across the country, over 100 cars, and well over 1 million rides. So,
wow,
it's a good story.
Now it's become more downtown circulators, bids with cities. It becomes again, it's gotten us more involved in mobility throughout, municipalities, so.
For the younger generation, a lot don't own cars.
It's true, they don't.
Many of them don't have
Come from the
driver's
city, they don't have a
license.
car.
No, it plays into the whole, walking, walkability in downtowns and easy access. So it clearly plays into a lot of what the focus is.
So it's a concept that we'll have to explore.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
I'm moving ahead to public hearings. A lot of you, I think, are here tonight for the maximum gross floor area of a dwelling. So I'd like to make a motion to open the public hearing on the maximum gross floor area of a dwelling. Second?
Second? Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any comments from the trustees?
No. So with,
Any comments from the public? Alvarado?
Good evening. Edward Simeoni, also known as Eduardo, 181 White Street. Before we make any further changes in the zoning, I think we must take into account all the changes that have already been made. From the 500 square foot reduction made across the board back in 2006 to the more recent changes, such as setbacks to center properties, parking that helps limit the number of bedrooms and thus the size of the homes, the pyramid law that now is valid for all zones, the height reduction, and including the accessory structures in the GFA. All these have an effect on the size of the homes. These are significant changes, but new construction does not occur overnight. Let's give these a chance to take effect. The proposed reduction, I feel, is drastic, especially for anything half an acre and over. For example, in an acre lot, the proposed reduction is 800 square foot. You can actually fit a 2-bedroom apartment in New York in this square footage. And an acre lot is actually quite large. The homes are set back far away from the street, with ample side yard setbacks. So I really don't see how such a reduction will really benefit anyone. Also, the concept of the GFA formula is one of fairness, allowing equal development rights across the board. This present amended proposal instead wants to make an exceptions in zones 7.5, which goes counter to the original concept of the same development rights across the board. We were careful in crafting the original formula so they would work for everyone. In the end, even if you do vote for these reductions, as long as there is change and what is being built is different and larger than what is being replaced, you always find those who will complain about the changes. So I don't know where this will end. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to just point out a couple of things on it. This gross floor area review was not something that developed after the original side lots and heights and pyramid laws that we had looked at before. It was something that we knew should really be brought into the fair. And I think in the very beginning, when we started this process of controlling the size, it was clearly stated that as we went along, we were going to try to tweak the rules and make them more viable, and this is part of the tweaking process. We have looked at the 7.5, but I'm not thoroughly convinced that an equal amount across the board isn't the way to go, because a lot of the smaller lots are not affected by it, or they're affected on a very, very minimal basis. So, any other comments?
Well, they're affected by 10%.
Yes. Bonnie? but they're affected by other stuff.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Cannon. My address is 54 Miller Road in Southampton, New York. And I just wanted to make a comment regarding, what you all are doing and ask for consideration, specifically to the uniqueness of the neighborhood of Miller Road and Hillcrest. First of all, I wanted to thank Trustee Allen for the time that you have spent discussing, the situation. And basically, the lots, as we know, are very narrow in that area. And you all have suggested and said that many of those lots would not be affected by this change. There are only a few that possibly would be affected with, I think, probably less than, I would say, just round off 150 square feet of a decrease. But for that, even though that may not mean a lot to a lot of people because you have larger houses, 150 square feet means a lot to individuals that are already working with, narrow space and small houses. So, one of the things that I would say, because it has been brought to my attention that we may need to look at, other things as far as, the setbacks and things in that area, that before you make any type of change to basically, specifically for this community and for that area, to at least just hold off in making any type of a change until a full, type of analysis, could be made. Because any type of decrease to me, it may not mean a lot to others, but to those in the community, it does mean something. And I think that, to do the due diligence and to at least have a common courtesy to look at that community, speak to the community owners, that, before you do anything specific to that particular community, that you at least maybe hold off for further discussion. So that's one of the things that I wanted to basically say to you.
Thank you, Bonnie.
And Bonnie, thank you for offering to set up a meeting within the community, and we appreciate that.
And Bonnie, there's been the discussion here is really pushed by Trustee Allen to take a look at the Hillcrest area, because those are unique non-conforming lots that really don't fall in the guidelines of the rest of the community. And we fully realize that, and we are planning to address it. So if you could organize something that we can get up there and take a look and...
Right, and that's why I'm asking you to kind of hold off on, any decreases that would be affected to that community until you have an opportunity to actually speak, because it is a unique issue that is like no other issue in the village.
Yeah. It is. Any other comments from?
We'll just echo, she said 150 square feet. You're right, it may not seem like a lot, but, like, it's a bathroom, small bedroom, part of a room, so it's all relative.
That's a big bathroom.
Well, bath, but I mean, big, bedroom, but it's a couple things, so it's not, it's not nothing.
But it goes way beyond that. It goes to health department standards and side yard setbacks. There's a confluence of factors that have been in place and haven't really been analyzed to the level that it deserves to be analyzed. That's really the issue, because we don't understand that those lots are so narrow and they're so unique across the entire village.
Alvarado?
I can give a suggestion, maybe for that particular neighborhood, you could create a spot zoning, something that is just, that really takes into account the needs and the requirements and what those lots are like, and separate it from the rest of the village. That
Yeah.
may be an idea.
Well, that's what we're looking at.
Speak up, Wayne. How difficult is that?
Well, you can clearly create districts that have different features or otherwise pursuant to your comprehensive plan. What I just smirked about is your use of the word spot zoning, which is actually illegal.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah. Thank you, Counselor. Like, that's usually what
Beyond that,
we've been accused of trying to do that on the flip side, so yeah, that's not what you want to do.
You certainly could, and it's not unusual to find different neighborhoods that have different characteristics, whether it be architectural, zoning, or otherwise, that you could create overlay districts or whatnot, depending on the zoning, or even create a district in itself.
Just exempt them.
But that's a better way of terming it.
I just wanted to say something, though, certainly the lots on Hillcrest are smaller than many of the other lots in the village, but there's also pockets of different areas in the village that have small lots too.
Yes, yeah.
Like, despite popular opinion, Breeze Lane has some small lots, and Fordham has, small lots as well, and in that area, there's other, maybe not as small as the ones on Miller, but small compared to even the ones next door to them. So not limited to just looking at Hillcrest, but there's other areas where the lots are small.
Wouldn't the zoning board be at least you have the, right to go before the ZBA and ask them to give you a break, and presumably, if it's irrational
Well,
for
if the
that
whole
district.
thing's being looked at, it might as well be looked at for the whole village. In addition, one issue is raised for the Hillcrest area. I'm saying that there's other areas that this may apply to, or just distinct lots in different parts of the area. And maybe the way to address it is through the zoning board.
Yeah, but there's always a problem with the zoning board, because you don't always get it going through the zoning board. If a neighborhood is looking for relief, it's pretty standard. I mean, a lot of those lots are 40 feet wide up on Hillcrest. Some are 75, some of them. I mean, I think you have to really take a look at that entire neighborhood and make a decision. I also think there's some ranch-style houses that may not meet the necessary side yard setbacks the way they're set up right now. That's a hardship right there for them. And what if they want to go up? If they want to put a second story on a ranch-style house, I'm not sure they can do that because of the width of the property and the pyramid law. So I think that has to be looked at. But you are right. There are other neighborhoods that may be R12-5 that have very narrow lots. We have one in our neighborhood that's 35 feet wide. And honestly, the house practically sits right on the line. And that would not be allowed today, but it's there.
Yeah, and there's some on Fordham that are very small lots. Thank you.
They're sprinkled around here.
Excuse me?
They're sprinkled around the whole
Right,
village, right?
right.
You can, they're there. Kind of.
Lonnie wants to say something else.
You come up here, though, please.
Bonnie Cannon, 54 Miller Road, Southampton. I just wanted to be clear and make sure that we're clear, basically because of the fact that I understand about the sprinkles with that in the village, but we're talking about an entire community, an entire neighborhood. And yes, individuals could go before the zoning board, but again, those are, expenses that people don't have to go before the zoning board. So rather than, doing something like that.
We're willing to discuss giving you a separate treatment.
Right. So basically, so I'm clear, I know it's a unique situation, and basically, right now, whatever it is that you vote on, you need to hold off until you look at, specifically for that community, until you look at that entire situation. That's basically my opinion. Okay.
And we have Paul Travis, who heads our Planning Commission. I know, Paul, you had another meeting. Thank you for coming in. You missed it, but the short and long of it is Bonnie raised what you had already uncovered in your work, which is that the Hillcrest Street in and of itself was brought about in very unusual zoning and has the most narrow lots, and just all of those houses are affected. So revisiting that area in light of the many zoning changes that were undergone over the past 10, 15 years, really looking at that. And I don't know if you want to comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Travis, member of the Planning Commission. After I guess it was the previous public hearing when Bonnie and others brought up the issue of the unique conditions in that neighborhood, we asked our consultant, Studio AB, to do with, like, I would call it really an initial study, just to look at the circumstances there. So and I think they really are unique. Well, there are scattered non-conforming lots, I guess probably the best name for them, elsewhere in the village. There's no other place in the village that has the concentration of non-conforming lots that neighborhood has. We think, and again, I just want to caveat, this is an initial study. I think to be done the right way, it really needs careful study, and my own thought is the result we would want to get to is that anyone who lives in that lot could go and get a building permit without having to go through some special process of some sort. That we'd be able to come up with zoning that makes them as of right, just like any other lot in the village. So we believe that if there are 54 lots, basically on Hillcrest Avenue and Hillcrest Terrace, about 50% of them are now non-compliant. They've been non-compliant actually for a very long time. So zoning over many years, probably dating back to about 1995, has put in various items that have made them non-compliant. And I think we all missed it, to be honest. We just didn't realize that all of these things put together would impact them. They are also impacted by the rules that have come up over time. For example, how the Department of Health looks at it and others. So on those lots, it's very hard to get a new house built. Putting aside anything else, the other thing is that the average size right now is about 834 feet. So these are square feet. So these are obviously on the whole very small. And that's clearly going to change over time. I think we all realize that, and should change over time. Those are very small houses in today's world. The largest house that's been built to date is 1,500 feet. So significantly less than the gross floor area, either as it was 10 years ago, as it was last year, or as we've proposed in the last few months. So I think, what our study, I think, is showing is this is not really a gross floor area issue. It's really an issue of all the other rules that now have really impacted that neighborhood. So I think and I really do apologize for being late. If I could control the Long Island Railroad, I'd be very happy. But
We needed the bike.
So would they.
So would they, yes, exactly. I think I read somewhere that they ran the trains faster in 1895 than they do now. But I really think we should study it, and I also think, when we worked on the gross floor area, we had a series of workshops with architects and lawyers and others, which were enormously helpful in trying to fashion something that would work. I also think very important to making this work is getting real community input very early, so that we really understand what the goal is at the end of the day, and make sure it fits that. I do believe, by the way, that a previous speaker is correct, there are non-conforming lots elsewhere. This neighborhood really is unique. I mean, there's just no other neighborhood like it. And so I think the issues that really have come up in this neighborhood are not as true elsewhere. If you have a non-conforming lot in a typical R12.5 zone, our zoning already provides for mechanisms to go to the ZBA and address your issues. This is really, I think, a fairly unique circumstance. So I don't know if I covered the issues that came up, but...
So, I think probably part of the big issue over there are your setbacks.
Correct.
Yep. Your setbacks and also on the pyramid.
Right, it's really the front pyramid law that is the problem.
Because you have several lots that are 40 wide.
Correct.
by maybe 100 long. So
Correct.
that's a 4,000 square foot lot.
Yep.
Which would allow you to have a 1,900 square foot
Right.
house.
Right.
And you're saying the largest house over there is 1,500 square feet?
Yeah,
So
and in
it's not-
fact, it's even worse, not to make it insult to injury, but I think what we looked at is on that type of lot, just because of the geometry of the pyramid law and a number of other things, you really can't build more than 1,300 feet.
Right.
So obviously, that's not a result anyone wants. We want to make sure that you would basically have the same right to build a house as you would elsewhere in the village. So that's what we're trying to study and figure out what the best way to do that. You know, the balance, as always, is I think the pyramid law has had a very good result in the village as a whole. We've had houses that relate much better to their neighbors than they did before. Same thing with the setback law. So you don't want to throw them out, but on the other hand, you have to. It's very bad zoning to have a result where houses can't be built. And you're right, the first and biggest impact is setback, but the other thing that we've realized is because of the way the lots are shaped, they actually, to really get a decent house, you pretty immediately come into conflict with the front piece of the pyramid law also. So both come into play.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that has to be studied.
Yeah. So.
And Bonnie has graciously offered to help set up a very good community meeting so all of this can be explained and we can get a starting point as to the goal and some of the issues.
Yeah,
So,
that would be great.
thank you for that.
Thank you, Paul. You know, one of the real interesting things on this public hearing is that as we go,
Right.
so much comes out that we
Right.
didn't realize, and
Right.
really, that's the goal of a public hearing. So it has been very successful, and I mean, really what generated this, I think more than anything, is that in years past, one would build a house and pay absolute attention to craftsmanship and design
Right.
and perfection for the house. Today, we have a concept of building the maximum we can on a lot, and that's really what generated it. And now we're going back and we're taking a look at some things that have been neglected for years
Right.
that really need to be addressed.
Right. And, you know, it's always been a process. I think we've tried, you know, the chair, the former chair, C-Mac Savvy, I think, set us on a chart of trying to sort of come up with moderate answers that on the one hand shape houses in a way that are respectful of their neighbors, but at the same time try to make it in a way that the character of the village doesn't be changed.
Right.
And I think that's ultimately, you know, this is, the gross floor area that you're looking at really is the last piece in terms of the village as a whole, of trying to put into place, I think, a zoning process that acknowledges that in this village, houses are going to change. That we can't do anything about that, that's the world, but that hopefully over time they will change in a way that the neighbors will feel much less impacted than they have in the last few years. And I have to say again, you know, I agree with you very much. When we heard Bonnie speak last time, and then we really started looking at the facts, I was actually astonished at how many non-conforming lots there could be on one street, and that's really an issue that is very important to address. So.
Yep.
Can I just ask
Yeah.
Paul, while you're here?
Yeah.
Is there anything scheduled by way of a presentation on something that hasn't come up in a long time, and that was the proposed sewer district?
Not at this time. I think, you know, we're looking at it, you know, I think a major change has happened in the last 2 years, which is the county has started to license alternative mechanisms that don't necessarily require one central plant. Our thought, and I shouldn't be speaking for Mark Schickert, who's really been studying this for us, but our thought is because the way the central business district is arranged, where you have stores around the perimeters and then parking lots in the middle, we actually would be a very good place for those to happen. So the thought, I think, that we're working on is, could you do four or five of those? You don't have the very large bonding cost of doing one central plant. And maybe it also allows the property owners more input, because I think part of the problem before was the property owners didn't feel like they were having input into whether or not they were going to choose to go through the capital cost that a sewer system would take. So I think we're going to be in the place, and it's starting to happen in the county, over the next year where the village would have a real option to say, okay, we would put, a facility in back of the stores on Joe's Lane, a facility in the big main lot, a facility in the lot behind Sita Rivella, and that would be a more economical way of doing it. Could be done over time, and I think it would be done in a way that those owners would then have more input in when and how it happened. The county, until a year ago, for whatever reason, was absolutely opposed to it, but they really have changed.
Yeah, they have.
Did I read that West Hampton is getting a sewer?
Yes. Ironically, West Hampton's doing it because they studied what we had done.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, the mayor of West Hampton came to all our hearings, came to all our meetings, and I guess we should ask for
They're getting it and we're not.
we should ask for a contribution for the work we did for them.
Final price tag
There
on
was a lot
that.
of legwork there.
Yeah,
At least a commission.
right.
They don't even have a lake to justify it.
They don't have a lake as such. They basically have the same problem.
Yeah, they're on Moneybog Bay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of us along the South Fork have the same problem, that we all have drainage going north to south, and those of us on the south
right.
then end up with this significant issue.
Paul, I just want to thank you and the Planning Commission and everybody involved, because you've done such a great job on studying this issue, and you've done such a great job of not jumping to a conclusion. And, a lot of areas such as Hillcrest, which has been long ignored, has come up, and, we need to address it.
And let me just add, because I think it's very important that, the members of the commission have worked very hard on this. You don't always hear them talk and speak, but they've really all worked very hard. We have a wide range of views on the commission, which I think is a very good thing, because we need to reflect the wide range of views in the village. But there's a lot of work that goes on by all 7 members of the group. So I just want to...
And that's why I wanted to acknowledge it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Yes.
My name is Richard Kearns, and I live on Burnett Street, and we're a R12-5 district, and I want to show you my street and why I want to support the reduction in the gross square footage. This is a house that
Put it on the table,
Okay.
Richard, and then Charlie can perhaps focus in on it. Thank you.
This house was built about 4 years ago. It's 118 Burnett Street, and it was to code, and it's a classic, what we'd call a McMansion, which is, according to Carolyn Robb Zaleski, the Wall Street Journal quoted her as saying her definition of a McMansion is a overly large house with a hodgepodge of neoclassical details. And this is exactly what that is, with the columns and the moldings and everything. It's a classic McMansion. And in this picture, you see the impact on its neighbors. Doesn't look so bad there. And then here's the house to the west. It shades that house all half of the day, and then on the east side, it shades the property for the rest of the day. And this is another view. It really looks better in these photos than it actually is. And there are other McMansions. We're going to have a lot of McMansions on our street. And this house that is there, there was nothing significantly, there was nothing architecturally significant on the original house. So we didn't lose anything. But when this property it will be sold in a few years, and it will get another probably McMansion, and that's a really charming little house. And it will affect a very nice colonial revival house of the period. This is a new McMansion that replaced a house of no architectural significance. This is a house that is going to go, this is a building that was a church made into a rental property. It's going to be torn down, and it's going to be replaced by a McMansion. It's already been approved. This is another house that is, I mean, our little block is just great for spec building, but it's not great when you live on the street. It's not as nice for us. This house will probably be redeveloped. This house is for sale, is going to be sold on the corner. It's not on our block, but it's in the next block on Walnut and Pine. That's going to be sold. And I'm not saying that I think it's great that there's going to be some new building. I'm not objecting to new houses, but I just think they need to be a little bit smaller and not take up so much of the lots and really be so intrusive. And I think it's possible to do it. I mean, this house is going to be sold, and this building is going to be sold, and they're not architecturally going to be a great loss to the community. And this is also this is the same block where Mr. Robinson has a house on the corner of Meeting and Little Plains, and of course, he's going to have probably two McMansions there. He got approval quite a while ago for a very big McMansion on the entire lot. It's going to have a lot of garage doors along Little Plains. Won't be very attractive, but anyway. So this is what our little block is up against, and I think that I'm hoping that the new zoning, if it gets passed, it won't stop anything. It'll just make things more compatible with what's already there. And a lot of these houses are nice, and they're not going to get torn down. So they're going to have these huge McMansions and overly large houses all around them, which are intrusive, and they create a lot of shade. And that's not why we're out here, to be in the shade.
Thank you. That's
Thank you.
We're working on.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Hi, I'm Fred Weinfurt, 45 Roscoe Drive in Southampton. Just a thought crosses my mind, and wanting to be sensitive to the issues raised here this evening concerning the smaller lots and specific communities. But I'm just wondering, rather than holding up the issue of larger lots, say 12,000 or larger, half acres, et cetera, acre lots, whether you would want to move forward on making a decision, carve out that separate issue, and not hold up and create a larger window, time-wise, if you will, for the further development of larger homes in the village. I think maybe consideration should be given to our neighbors where there's a concern on the smaller lots, but also I wouldn't want to see that hold up the decision for larger lots in the village. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred.
Can we do that, Wayne? Can we carve out something without any great delay?
You can. You'd have to amend what you have presented again in the public forum.
Can we do that by our next meeting of this? I don't know if you want to do that in 2 weeks or a month, but could you? Great.
Any other comments?
I'll speak, yeah.
Good evening. I'm sorry I missed most of the other comments. I'm Mark Schipper with the Planning Commission, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to repeat some of the comments before, but this issue with the larger houses is a real issue, and I think that the Planning Commission, we've really tried to address all the complaints that were made. I think it's really something that needed to be addressed, and I think that it is something that we did address, that I think that we did enact and propose some regulations that you have enacted, and I think that some on the FAR, on the side yards, and however, I think that we haven't really had an opportunity to see the impact of those regulations yet. I think that they just were enacted, and I'm not sure. I think they will have a measurable effect, but we haven't really seen it. And the second point that I wanted to make was about the smaller lots. I think that there is an impact on the smaller lots that maybe in the absolute doesn't really mean that much, but 2% on the 6,000 square foot lot is 120 square feet. It's bigger than a room. So maybe in the absolute, it's not. Maybe not be that much, but it's something that at the last Planning Commission, we did discuss to possibly have a vehicle to possibly address the impact on the smaller lots through maybe an accelerated process through the ZBA, or to be able to have a special expedited review to get relief from that regulation. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to put it together yet. So I think that although the regulation is definitely pointing in the right direction in terms of timing, I'm not so sure that we should really rush into doing something that may have a little bit more of an impact that we want it to be for everybody.
Thank you. With that said, I would, unless confer with the board, and if, Bill, you have another idea, I personally feel that this open forum on this has been a very productive thing, that we've uncovered a lot of issues that we weren't expecting, and we have a whole community to take a look at, and we have a number of smaller lots that are, as Nancy, I think you pointed out, sprinkled around the village. So I would be leaning towards making a motion of keeping this hearing open until the next meeting, which would be
April 24th.
April 24th?
Second?
Thank you. Thank you all for your input. Also in the public hearings, which has been discussed, and Maureen, I believe you made a comment on it, amending the residency requirements for appointed officers. The intent here is that it's not on the boards itself, it would be on the appointed officers to different positions. Maybe council, you could better verify the difference there?
Difference between?
The administrative.
Board members and officers.
Well, you have officers and you have employees that this applies to. You have certain administrative officials that are appointed by this board, and this law right now, currently the way the code is, would require them to be residents of the village. So as you go through the variety of different positions, it goes back to what you stated in the beginning, is just this provides the board the future flexibility to look outside the boundaries of the village if you need to fill those positions. At the last meeting, I think there was a lot of comments, and even comments from this board, and I had commenced drafting, subject to the board's confirmation at tonight's hearing. Specifically, I think the comments were your appointed boards that are administering the zoning code, basically your zoning board, your planning board, and
CBA.
the ZBA and the ARB, that you were leaning towards making the exception to what this change would be, with that they would have to remain residents, just like this elected board members, the elected officials must be residents. So you would keep that provision in there.
Correct. Do we have any comment from the public on that?
Just as an aside, other administrative boards like the ambulance board, things like that, you might want to have flexibility. A lot of the ambulance department is sometimes outside. I know many of your volunteers are outside the village. So something like that, even though that's a board, you may want to have that flexibility. But the three main boards, you may want to keep the residency requirement.
Were those boards, you mentioned that, the volunteers, were they subject to this?
Yes.
Good to know.
Yeah, there's no,
Bonnie, I think you had a comment?
no other exclusion.
Bonnie Cannon, 54 Miller Road, Southampton. I just think that it's been for years that village residents, you had to be a village resident to be appointed to the boards. I'm just having issues with that being changed. The only way that I could see, and I understand what you were saying, that you're having a hard time finding people or willing individuals to step up that are qualified to be on the boards. I don't know if I fully agree with you on that, but I think that, there can be some creative things or some out-the-box ways to, put forth for recruitment for individuals on the board. I know that we usually advertise or put the vacancies in the newspaper, but, why not hold a forum? Many people may not even understand what, the board is. They may not understand, what their responsibilities are, and it may be worth, just having a public forum where individuals can come. It's an awareness session to talk about each individual board, what their requirements are, what they have to do, and you'd be surprised that some people, they just don't know that they could be qualified to be appointed to the board. So that's my first suggestion. The other thing is, if you are going to do that, if you are going to do something like that, then I think that it would be only right that at least 51% of the individuals on the board be village residents. So if you're going to do something where you go outside, at least make it a mandate that 51% of the individuals on each appointed board have to be a village resident.
Okay. What we were doing is leaving the boards all village residents, but taking a look at the officers on some of the volunteer boards, which right now are required to be village residents.
Feels the same.
Well, that is just already as exists, not just the officers, but the participants and the volunteers don't all live in a village. It would be impossible, and I tell you mathematically impossible, to fulfill the requirements of the volunteer positions and have them all be within the village.
Well, not the volunteer.
Well, that's right, but that's what he just said. So that's what you said you disagree. You can't, that's one thing, that's part of where this is covering as well.
The officers.
Meaning the
Well, they're part
fire
of the
department,
volunteers.
the ambulance,
They're
all
part
of
of
them.
the same pool.
But I'm saying the officers.
But they're part of the same pool, which is,
But are they all village residents?
No.
That's what I'm saying.
But
Yeah, that's,
currently, our law states that they should be, and so that's what we're taking a look at. Nobody realized that, and we have a pool of people who volunteer, and that's what we need to adjust that to reflect the fact that we have this group.
But the appointed boards right now would still stay the same?
Yes,
that's what the mayor just said, is that the ones we're really drawing attention to, ARB, ZBA, such like that, the appointed boards, the mayoral appointments, he's proposing to keep village residents. It's all the other, there are many different boards that make up the structure of the village, and it's just the volunteers, but other appointed officers within the different departments that just by practice, nobody knew, until they pointed out, that may not have been a village resident. This technically points out that they should have been. This kind of is kind of fixing that. But what came up in the process was the appointed board thing, and I think we've all heard pretty loud and clear. And I agree to it at some point. I'm a homegrown type of person. I believe in that. That should be left to village person with skin in the game.
Can I just ask for clarification? What's the ambulance board? I never heard of that.
She's talking about the chiefs and the officers, and the fire department and the council boards.
That's what, you're calling the chiefs the board, or are you referring?
We're calling them the officers, but
The
they're
officers.
appointed.
That's what the counselor's saying that.
By code, Chapter 4 of the code has officers of the
Okay,
ambulance
so
department
let
are
me clarify
appointed by
this.
the mayor.
The zoning board, ZBA, the architectural review board,
Planning
the planning board,
The planning
the
commission.
planning commission, the ethics board.
Not ethics, because there are people who are on ethics that aren't in the village, are they?
The ethics
Wait,
board.
there's people got on the ethics board and I didn't? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, we'll go back over that some other time. Okay, so those have to remain village residents.
Yes.
Now, what about the point that my husband raised, that people are automatically excluded?
That's not true.
No, yeah.
There's no law, there's no policy.
There's no law.
There's no law, there's no policy of this village that states what you just stated.
Okay, you'll have to speak to Ron about that.
There's none.
Okay.
What-
But there's
what he's
none, but there
confronting
may have
is-
been a preference to
No.
exclude these people.
No, I think what the issue there that deals with your husband as an engineer and other professionals that go on boards is the potential conflict of interest issues and ethical issues. And where one is doing business or has so much business that he cannot perform his duties, he cannot sit properly on a board. So that comes into play. And I don't know what your husband's particular issue is, but there are professionals can be on the board and not have those problems, but there are others that do. So, and that's the decision that may come up as a board is interviewing various candidates. But that is not a policy or a rule or otherwise.
I think what your letter was implying before, Maureen, was about an individual bias. But what the council was saying, there is nothing in code or law
Okay.
that says that is mandated.
Okay, but you clarified what's going to remain the same, and I didn't understand that. Thank you.
Yep.
My name is Richard Kernan, and I heard about this, getting people from out of this village, and I heard you say that you might get an architect to be on the architectural review board, because I know that if you practice in this community, then the good towning, I don't know, there's some council or something that, or when you get I've forgotten about what it is, this small government or something, something of a state thing about it, that you shouldn't be an architect in practice here. And so there are some very sophisticated architects in East Hampton that, might be interesting to have on this board. But I have had an experience advising architectural review boards in communities that I've lived in, Palm Beach and in Annapolis, and I remember architects being on review boards, and they don't like to criticize other architects, and it's almost as if when you go to AIA or whatever those things is, they just, because I remember in Annapolis the architect who in Annapolis was a government employee, but he was an architect and qualified. And there was a person that wanted to put up a chain link fence in front of the Hammond Harwood House, which is a National Historic Landmark, 18th century building, one of the great landmarks. And the architect voted to approve the chain link fence because the architect
And it wasn't like Frank Gehry doing something wonderful with the building next to it was just, and so I think it's better to have it's fine not to have architects on the architectural review board. Okay? Thank you.
That's your parting shot.
Okay. I'm not going to say anything. Please mute.
Any other comments? Any comments from the board?
You just said.
My only comment is I think the village still has a lot of firing power in terms of really good, talented people who can be on the boards. We interviewed about 6 or 8 for the ARB, and I think we're all in favor with keeping those boards within the village. So, I mean, I shouldn't say we're all in favor, I'm assuming.
Okay.
So
my recommendation
we have to close
is
this out, but then
keep the hearing open
Right.
for all purposes, and then you can consider an amendment
for the
next hearing.
At the next meeting. So I'll make a motion to keep the amendment residency requirements open until the next board meeting, which you told me what it was. It was
April 24th.
April 24th.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
And the third public hearing we have tonight is
On the number 2, amending residency requirements for appointed officers, does everyone understand that? I mean, because we just did that. And what are we going to do with that?
The residency?
Yeah, for the appointed
What I
officers.
propose is to
Discuss
create a list of which boards and officers and other administrators or otherwise that are in the village, and have you all take a look at that and tell me which ones you want to keep as residents, and those you want to have the flexibility perhaps in the future.
good.
Okay.
I mean, I have a good start, the 4 boards that you
Right.
identified, but there may be others.
Others, okay.
Third item, we have the public hearing.
Well, I wanted to say something.
Mayor, somebody, Rob had a question.
Just a quick question, Paul Bolo, about the residency requirements. Is it stated that you have to be a resident or you have to maintain your residency? That's why.
You have to be a resident.
You have to be a resident at the time of hiring, right? So there's nothing preventing a person from moving in, renting, living in the village for a period of time after being hired. They could essentially move out, right?
No, they have to remain a resident.
They have to remain
So
a
it
resident.
is, you have to be at the time of appointment and maintain.
And maintain residency,
Is
okay.
it stated that way? Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, thanks for clarification.
One of you guys move out of the village, you can't, you got to resign.
You have to get off the board.
Thank you.
Hand in your jersey.
Don't move, Paul.
Okay, third public hearing. And this one, Mr. Funch has been such a big and significant help on this, the 2018-2019 proposed budget. And, you are far more superior to be able to talk about it. So I'll make a motion to open it.
Second?
Second.
Annual budgets are always a particular interesting conversation, but this one is kind of mundane. We're looking at a 3.2% increase in the overall budget, going from $29,359,000 to $30,298,000. Tax rate increase from 19.004 to 19.43, which is a 2.26% increase. I turn your attention to the second to last page, which is always the proverbial comment with the tax cap calculation. And that applies to our levy. Last year's levy was $22,654,000, and there's a twofold calculation on this, where the state assigns what they call a tax-based growth factor, which I call a brick and mortar number, which is you're allowed an increase of 2.3% on that levy based on the new construction within the village. And then obviously inflation is over 2% this year, so we're allowed another 2% on top of that. So you apply those factors and you're allowed to increase your levy by 4.35%, which is $984,577. which we did. There's really no real monumental increases here. The only, obviously, biggest problem we face every year is increases in the medical costs, which is $370,000 over the prior year. And pension is always the other question, which that is actually basically stayed flat thanks to the results of the stock market. Where actually state retirement is up $5,000 and police retirement is down $3,500. Okay. Your main chart there shows your overall increases per department. We did have an increase in highway. That's primarily due to planned paving increases over the next year. And, otherwise, that's really the highlights. It's not a heck of a lot. I just have to thank the department heads. They did a great job on this. They use zero-based budgeting on this, which means they start from ground zero every year, and not just taking a percentage increase from the previous year. They do analyze all the reports that they do get as far as their expenditures are concerned.
Does anybody have any questions, or? Bonnie? We need you here at every meeting.
You got to take a closer seat, Bonnie.
Hi, Bonnie Cannon, 54 Miller Road, Southampton. A couple of things that I just noticed on the budget, and I did have a question as far as where does Parks and Recreations fall into this, and what is that?
Parks and Rec are
Parks Department.
it's an $81,000 increase.
Okay, and
Page 1 to page 11.
so page 11.
Detail.
Okay, and that $81,000 increase is for?
Well, we've budgeted for one more labor, full-time labor in the department, and decrease the seasonal grasshopper help.
Okay.
So there's a $50,000 increase for the personnel and a $30,000 decrease in the seasonal. And we have a $26,000 increase in supplies and materials and $24,000 in contractual services.
So with the supplies and materials and equipment, you're looking to increase, I see that is increasing to, whether you have an increase of $4,000 for the equipment?
Correct.
And then, so that would include like playground equipment and things of that. So you increase the budget for $4,000 for equipment, and then with supplies and materials also fall into that, the $26,400 increase that you have there?
Yeah, that's fertilizers, lime.
Okay, so basically my question is there anything in here, because I see you also have a miscellaneous, but the miscellaneous, there's no increase there. And I would ask or look at, because I'm coming back to the issue of basketball courts within the village of Southampton.
Well, that would come out of the Park Trust Fund.
That would come out of the Parks Restaurant.
This is a maintenance budget.
Okay, so that would come out of the Park Trust Fund. And we do have money in there that could possibly go for basketball courts, because we currently have no basketball courts that are in the village of Southampton. And I've been told that the reason why we don't is because people don't want it, because of the fact that they're noisy. But I'm sorry, we have baseball fields, we have soccer fields, and I understand that there was a discussion regarding bocce courts, but still, there are no basketball courts. We used to have at least about 4 of them, now we're down to 1. I did speak with, we have the coach of our Southampton High School, that our championships, I did speak with him, and he had indicated basically that, yeah, there is a need for basketball courts that are outside of that, where people do want to play basketball outside. They just don't want to play it inside. Right. And that's just not our youth, but also individuals, adults want to be able to play basketball. And basketball, we should at least have 1 basketball court, and it should be some monies which you already have available that should be put away, and we should, find a place to put basketball court.
We're very close to doing that, Bonnie.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. And then on your page where you have your committees, I'm very glad to see that you have allocated $2,000 for the Senior Citizen Committee, because I know at one point in time, that was way down there with, these other ones, but it does concern me when I see that our minority and youth committees are only allocated $250, specifically with all of the issues that we have with our youth today, with our opiate issues and things that are going on with our youth. I would hope that there's some kind of way that you could maybe allocate more funding toward our Minority and Youth Committee. And the other thing that I wanted to also mention is the fact that many of you campaigned on affordable and attainable housing. And I know that it was said that the Planning Commission is going to be looking into affordable and attainable housing. But I say with, such an important issue, and everybody has recognized that it is an important issue, I think that there should actually be a committee for that, actually call it a housing, attainable, affordable housing committee, but individuals that are set aside to specifically look at that particular issue. Because the Planning Commission, pretty much, they have many things to do. They're looking at zoning, they're looking at everything, but this is such an important issue. There should be set aside a specific committee for affordable, attainable housing with some monies that are actually associated with it, so that they can be able to do the work that everyone has addressed and acknowledged that needs to be done in the village of Southampton. Thank you.
So just to comment on that, I'm sorry, Rich, did you?
No, it's just...
So first of all, thank you for raising that. Second of all, we're working on it, and we see 2 subcommittees in the Planning Commission. Paul Travis needs to architect it a little bit more with the folks in his commission, but one is the attainable housing side. Laura Davini and Joe McLaughlin have already taken some steps towards that, meeting with the town. We had a meeting with the town, as a matter of fact, last week. They had it, I think, a couple of weeks ago.
And we met this past week,
as well as carving out another subgroup to the Planning Commission, which relates to environmental issues. We've had a number of complaints around that. So it's going to be a new way of how the Planning Commission operates, and just we're as eager as you are to understand the issues, as well as with cluster septic systems. That was the third part of it. So I didn't want you to think we weren't thinking about it.
Right, because right now, if, just as you have said, right now you have basically for this entire time, which I'm not saying it's not important, it's not what the constituents want, but basically we've been focused pretty much on zoning. And there are other issues that need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed now. So I welcome to see that if the Planning Commission is going to be able to work on these issues alongside of all the other issues. But again, I just suggest that there are other individuals that could help with this issue, that are experts, that can be on the, that can be in a committee. Maybe you take a couple of individuals from the Planning Commission to head it up, and they basically call in experts or individuals that pretty much are in knowledge of this particular issue, and have them all work on a committee. That's basically something I would suggest. But going back to my other thing, the amounts that you have down here for the minority and the youth, $250, I just feel that there should be more monies that should be allocated toward that effort.
I just have to make one comment, and I don't think this board has only focused on zoning. I think we focused a lot on water quality, which is legislation that was ushered in by all of us back in October. We've also focused on water quality infrastructure with Agawam Park and with the CPF fund. We've focused on strategic CPF fund development, parks and recreation, opioid crisis, trying to follow up with the 3 nor'easters that came within, 14 days? And also community security. So there's been a number of different fronts. And I'm new, but I have to tell you, everybody here is running. And It's not just us, it's Steve Funch and Julian.
And while that might be, what you're saying, again, if we run the tapes back, the main thing, and then I would say the number 2 thing that people campaigned on and that was spoken about was affordable and attainable housing for our community. And the fact that basically, you've laid out a number of other things that have been addressed. Affordable, attainable housing needs to be addressed, and, you said that 2 individuals are going to be addressing it on planning commission. I don't think that's enough. I think you need a committee that actually needs to look at it, and look at it now.
And they're working on it.
Good. Thank you. Any other comments on the budget? I would just throw in that doing this budget for this village is a very difficult thing, and I can't stress enough how important Mr. Funch is to doing this, especially when you got to stay within the cap. It really makes it difficult. We try to provide the nicest, cleanest, best village we can, and between protection and parks and even affordable housing, it is very difficult to allocate, even though we're very lucky and have a budget that is above most small municipalities. It is very, very difficult to keep in that 2% cap. And we've tried every year. I think we've done it for the past 4 or 5 years, haven't we?
Ever since it came out.
Yeah, which is, I think, pretty impressive for a small municipality, especially when we bear the burden of a tremendous entitlement program. So, any other comments?
Can I just add something to that too, Mayor? What's important because people ask all the time how the budget 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago was a certain number, and and that always comes up. But I think the important thing to note, I always point out to people, is yes, the actual budget itself has increased. What we've been very, again, through Mr. Funch, throughout the years, very conscious of is keeping the rate at a certain, and there's been certain factors that allow that, as far as property values and taxes and so forth, and building permits. But people see the budget at a certain number and they automatically, oh my God, everything's growing. What really has happened is the size of the village, meaning the workforce, has either stabilized in some departments or actually decreased. So our headcount has decreased. We've actually made our departments work a lot more efficiently with less bodies and less equipment. But what has happened in the same time frame is that the cost of maintaining the existing personnel through benefits and so forth, long-term planning, has gone up significantly. And the cost of just operating. Somebody asked me about, paving and the roads and how that, again, that's directly related to the cost of the products. They're going to petroleum-based products. So that's always, each and every year, less and less roads. And I remember when I used to oversee the highway department, and there's a chart done every year about which roads are going to be addressed. And each year, more and more are getting pushed off. So people need to realize, they see an increase in a number, like a slight increase here, without a doubt. But I think because of all the work that's gone into it, and the department heads, when you go down all these lines, department heads go, and, I don't think anybody's squandering anybody's tax dollars. I think they've worked really tight within, and they're making it work. And as the mayor pointed out, it's the reason why the village looks the way it does. It maintains its value and its allure because, just the morning, just go down the streets, 7 a.m., we got a street sweeper and the street being blown every morning. Not every municipality does that. The streets look beautiful and they're safe, but you know what that costs too.
Just like to add to what you're saying, you raise a very important distinction between the budget increase and the rate increase. And if you go to the third last page, there's a 12-year chart there, and I'll just read off the last 5 years. The current year, we're looking at a 3.2% increase in the budget with a 2.26% increase in the rate. Last year was 476 increase in the budget with a 1.47 increase in the rate. Previous year was 171 compared to 158 in the rate, and 2015 was a 4.42% increase in the budget with 1.38% in the rate. So it is a very important distinction.
Yeah. When people bring up increase in taxes, A lot of that's from other areas that we pay, our school and our town taxes, but certainly within the village, our taxation and what we pay here, comparatively speaking, we're the cheapest, rate-wise. Thanks, Steve.
Yep, thank you, and, thank you to all the departments, too, because they did a great job in keeping their budget down, and they moved some stuff around, whether or not it was a reduction in personnel or an increase in equipment, so they're paying attention. And thank you, Gary, for overseeing them all. I know it's tough at times. Any other comments? So I'll make a motion to accept the 2018.
But we have to keep it open for one more hearing.
We do?
Yeah, we need 2 hearings.
Okay.
So
So
it
I'll
remain
make a
open
motion
until the 24th.
to keep it open until that April 24th date and 2018-2019 proposed budget. Do I have a second?
Second? In favor?
Aye.